Imagine an ordinary Filipino singer stepping onto the AGT stage, only for America to witness one of the most iconic voices ever heard. The moment he opens his mouth, the judges freeze, the audience explodes, and history begins to rewrite itself. This isn't just an audition. This is a phenomenon. The stage doors slid open slowly, and for a moment, the entire AGT auditorium seemed to inhale at the same time. A young Filipino man, slim, calm, carrying a quiet kind of confidence, stepped into the piercing lights. His name, Miguel Arlan, flashed gently across the screens as he walked toward the center of the stage, his footsteps echoing with an almost cinematic clarity. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple black jacket and dark jeans, but something about the way he carried himself made the room lean in. Clutched in his hand was an old-style silver vintage microphone, one that immediately stood out against the modern AGT set. Its polished head caught the stage lights like a small star. Miguel held it delicately, almost reverently, like a precious memory he didn't want to drop. The crowd whispered among themselves, wondering why he brought his own mic. Even the judges traded curious glances. It wasn't common. In fact, it was rare, and rare on this stage usually meant one thing: something interesting was coming. Heidi raised her eyebrows with a warm smile. Sophia tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. Howie leaned forward, hands clasped, and Simon, always the most unreadable of the four, simply stared at the vintage microphone, his expression narrowing, not in annoyance, but in suspicion. He had seen countless singers walk on stage, but Miguel's presence had an unusual calmness to it, as though he wasn't just about to audition. He was about to reveal something deeply personal. Miguel took his place on the center mark, then looked up at the judges. His voice, when it finally came out, was soft and polite. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Miguel Arlan. I'm from the Philippines." The crowd responded with supportive cheers, and Miguel nodded gratefully. His hands trembled slightly around the microphone, but his eyes held a quiet fire. Heidi was the first to speak. "Welcome to AGT, Miguel. Why did you bring your own microphone? That's interesting." Miguel looked down at the silver mic and smiled shyly. "This belonged to my grandfather. He used it when he performed at small bars back home. He loved Elvis. That's actually why I'm here today." Immediately, an excited ripple rolled across the audience. Elvis. A bold choice, a dangerous choice. The crowd loved Elvis tributes, but the judges? They were harder to impress. Imitations often fell flat, and Simon had a very long history of disliking Elvis impersonators who tried too hard. Sophia leaned closer. "So, you're performing Elvis?" Miguel nodded, gripping the mic a little tighter. "Yes, ma'am, but not as an impersonation. More like a tribute from the heart. My grandfather taught me how to sing. He passed away last year. This is for him." Heidi placed a hand over her heart. "Ah, that's beautiful." Simon's expression softened, but only slightly. "Okay, Miguel, Elvis is big, really big. You know that, right? People try to sound like him all the time, and it usually doesn't go well. So what makes you different?" Instead of shrinking under the pressure, Miguel lifted his eyes and actually met Simon's gaze. His voice was steady. "I'm not trying to sound like him. I'm trying to honor him. And I'm singing the way he taught me. My way." That answer alone made the room shift. It was honest, quiet, but powerful. The judges nodded, satisfied enough to let him continue. Miguel took a single step backward, then lifted his vintage mic to his lips. The stage lights dipped into a warm amber glow, casting a nostalgic, almost dreamlike atmosphere across the stage. The audience hushed so quickly the silence was almost startling. Miguel inhaled deeply, his shoulders rising slowly, then falling as he centered himself. His eyes fluttered closed, blocking out the thousands of eyes watching him, blocking out the pressure of the moment. For the first time since he walked in, he looked calm, peaceful, as if he could hear his grandfather's voice whispering reminders from the past, as if he were standing in a quiet room back home, singing beside the man who taught him everything. A soft tremor passed through his hand as he adjusted the microphone. He whispered almost to himself, "For you, Lolo." The audience saw the vulnerability in that moment, and their expressions softened. On the judges' panel, Sophia pressed her fingers against her lips, touched by the sincerity. Heidi smiled again, but this time with warmth rather than curiosity. Howie leaned even further forward, his interest fully captured. And Simon, usually the hardest to read, sat back in his chair, his head tilting slightly as if re-evaluating everything he initially assumed about this quiet young man. The background music operator waited for a cue. Miguel gave a tiny nod, almost invisible, and the familiar soft intro began to play. The first gentle chords floated out across the auditorium, and instantly the air changed. A rush of nostalgia washed over the room. Warm, soft, golden. Miguel exhaled again, deeper this time. His fingers found a firmer grip on the mic. His posture shifted from nervous to grounded, from hesitant to prepared. Every second of his preparation felt meaningful, like he wasn't just singing a song, he was honoring a legacy. And as the music built toward the first vocal entry, the entire AGT audience seemed to hold its breath. 1,000 people frozen in anticipation, a panel of judges watching with sharpened focus, a silent stage waiting for a voice worth remembering. In that exact second, before he even opened his mouth, everyone could feel it. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The moment the music settled into its opening rhythm, Miguel opened his eyes, and everything inside him seemed to shift. The nervousness that had hovered around him like a shadow evaporated, replaced by something deeper, stronger, almost electric. His gaze softened, his posture straightened, and his grip on the vintage microphone tightened as if drawing strength from decades of memories. Then he sang. The very first note that left his lips sent a physical jolt through the entire auditorium. It wasn't just good. It was shockingly, breathtakingly pure. A warm, golden tone rolled across the room, rich and full, carrying a depth that didn't belong to someone so young. It echoed with the soulful resonance of a much older voice, powerful yet gentle, emotional yet controlled. Heidi gasped audibly. Sophia's eyes flew open wide, her jaw dropping. Howie blinked as though trying to reset his mind, and Simon, who had been leaning back skeptically, slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, completely frozen. His eyebrows shot up in a way the world rarely saw. He wasn't just impressed, he was stunned. Miguel continued, his voice effortlessly gliding through the melody. It wasn't an impersonation, it wasn't mimicry, it was something else entirely. His own voice infused with that unmistakable Elvis warmth, the softness in the verses, the velvet-smooth control, the emotional weight behind every syllable. They came together in a way that felt impossible to ignore. The way he shaped each word made it clear he wasn't just singing the lyrics, he was living them. The crowd, at first silent in awe, began reacting uncontrollably. Some people pressed their hands over their mouths. Others whispered things like, "No way," or "That can't be real." A few fans stood up slowly, unable to stay seated, as they watched a moment unfold that felt almost historic. As Miguel reached the first small vocal climb, he gave it a gentle push, a run so clean and perfectly placed that the audience erupted into cheers mid-song. That kind of reaction almost never happened on AGT. The judges glanced at each other in shock, their reactions synchronized because they all understood at the same exact moment. This wasn't just a good singer. This was something rare. Miguel's eyes remained half-closed, as though he were seeing memories rather than the bright stage. For a moment he seemed transport. Back home, back in a small living room, back to afternoons singing with his grandfather who had taught him those songs in cracked, warm Filipino English. Every note felt like a thank you. Every breath carried emotion. From the judges' table, Simon shifted again, his face caught between disbelief and admiration. He whispered something to himself that the cameras didn't catch, but his expression said it all. "I did not expect that." The music swelled into the chorus, and Miguel stepped into it effortlessly. His voice expanded, filling every corner of the massive auditorium. The depth grew, the vibrato widened, and the passion behind his delivery intensified. His movements became more fluid, not exaggerated or theatrical, but natural, small sways, gentle footsteps, almost like a dancer tracing invisible memories. Every time he sang a long, sustained note, the room reacted like a wave crashing through an ocean of people. Heads tilted back, hands covered hearts, and phones lifted instinctively to capture the impossible moment. Tears began forming in the eyes of some audience members who felt something powerful in his voice, a mix of nostalgia and something entirely new. By the time Miguel reached the second verse, his confidence had transformed completely. His voice grew bigger, braver, more alive. It soared with the kind of raw power that felt impossible for someone so young to contain. His high notes were controlled but soaring, his low notes were warm but commanding. He blended technique and soul so effortlessly it left professional musicians in the crowd staring in awe. Heidi whispered, "Oh my God!" Sophia clutched Heidi's arm. Howie nodded to himself, deeply impressed, and Simon, still silent, was watching Miguel with laser focus, the kind of look he saved only for once-in-a-season performers. As Miguel approached the emotional bridge, he opened his eyes and swept his gaze across the audience. The lights hit him perfectly, glowing around his silhouette like a spotlight from the heavens. For the first time since he started, he allowed a small smile to break through, a smile that revealed gratitude, relief, and an inner fire. The bridge soared. Miguel unleashed a run so impossibly smooth that the entire auditorium erupted into applause even though the song wasn't close to over. The reaction was instant, loud, unstoppable. People rose to their feet, one row at a time, until a full standing ovation lit up the room in the middle of the performance. The lights reflected off hundreds of raised hands, making the scene sparkle like something out of a movie. Miguel, hearing the roar, closed his eyes for a split second and lifted his chin slightly, letting the emotion flow through him. His voice responded with even more power, clean, resonant, heart-piercing. Every note landed with precision, and yet every note carried his soul. He wasn't performing anymore. He was storytelling, he was honoring, he was remembering. The orchestra swelled toward the climax of the song, and Miguel prepared for the final vocal climb. The room tensed with anticipation. Judges leaned forward. Audience members lifted their phones. A hush spread across the arena like a blanket of electricity. Miguel inhaled, then he delivered the high, iconic note, a long, soaring, perfectly controlled burst of emotion that hung in the air like something supernatural. It was flawless. Not loud for the sake of loud, but powerful in the most breathtaking emotional way. The audience exploded. Screams, cheers, gasps. The loudest reaction of the night. People jumped to their feet. Someone in the balcony began crying. A wave of applause swept through the room like thunder. Miguel held the note even longer, pushing it with every ounce of sincerity he possessed before finally letting it fall gently into a soft ending line, rich and warm. As the final note faded, the building shook with applause. He had just delivered one of the greatest vocal moments AGT had ever heard. The final note lingered in the air like a held breath, shimmering through the auditorium long after Miguel's lips had closed. For a moment, the entire AGT arena froze in complete silence, as if no one quite knew how to react to what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the usual 1-second pause before applause. It was longer, heavier, almost sacred. Miguel stood on the stage, his chest rising and falling with the remnants of emotion. His eyes were wet, but he held them steady on the distant lights. His hand, still wrapped around his grandfather's vintage microphone, trembled. Then, all at once, the room erupted. The audience exploded into cheers so loud the camera shook. People leapt to their feet in a tidal wave of energy that surged upward from the front row all the way to the balcony. It was as if an invisible spark had ignited everyone at the same exact moment. 1,000 hands shot into the air. Some people screamed, others cried openly. A few clutched their friends, shouting things like, "Oh my God!" And that was unreal. It wasn't applause. It was celebration. A celebration of something extraordinary. Miguel's eyes widened at the sound. He brought a hand to his face, overwhelmed, trying to keep himself from breaking down. He whispered a soft thank you, though no one could hear it over the roar of the crowd. On the judges' table, the reaction was just as powerful. Heidi rose first, her hands pressed over her heart, eyes shimmering with emotion. She began clapping above her head, smiling so big it looked almost unreal. Sophia was right behind her, launching upright from her seat, throwing both hands in the air as she shouted over the noise, "Incredible! Incredible!" Howie stood too, nodding vigorously, his mouth hanging open in stunned disbelief. He clapped so hard his hands turned red, shaking his head as though he couldn't process what he had just experienced. But Simon stayed seated, and that made the moment even more intense. His eyes were locked on Miguel with an expression that almost no one ever saw on his face. Part awe, part admiration, part complete shock. His lips parted, but no sound came. He wasn't judging. He wasn't analyzing. He was genuinely moved. Finally, After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Simon slowly stood. The crowd erupted even louder at the sight. A standing ovation from all four judges. Rare, powerful, undeniable. Miguel saw Simon rise, and his hand flew to his chest as tears finally pushed through. His shoulders shook as the weight of the moment sank in. He wasn't just singing anymore. He was living every dream he had carried from the Philippines to this stage. The applause continued, wave after wave, until Simon finally lifted his hand, a gentle request for quiet. The crowd obeyed reluctantly, still murmuring with excitement as the judges prepared to speak. "You," Simon began, pointing directly at Miguel, "you are the reason this show exists." The audience roared again, but Simon continued, his voice stronger now. "I have heard Elvis tributes for years. I have seen impersonators, mimics, and covers. But what you just did—" He paused, searching for the right words. "That wasn't Elvis. That was you. Your soul, your story, your emotion. It was one of the most iconic performances we've ever had on this stage." Miguel sobbed softly, covering his mouth with his hand. His shoulders trembled as tears streamed freely down his face. The crowd cheered louder. Sophia leaned into her microphone next. "Miguel, from the moment you started singing, I felt something in my heart. I felt your grandfather with you. I felt love, passion, history. Your voice, it shook me. And America can feel that too." The audience clapped again, echoing her sentiment with loud whistles and cheers. Heidi followed, wiping her eyes. "You didn't just sing, you created a moment. A beautiful, emotional, unforgettable moment. You made the whole room stand up. You made America stand up. That is iconic." Howie shook his head, smiling wide. "You took one of the biggest names in music history and made it your own. That's not bravery, that's artistry." Miguel tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Thank you. Thank you so much. This is for my Lolo." The crowd melted at the mention of his grandfather. People cheered his name, "Miguel, Miguel, Miguel," their voices filling the arena like a chorus of support. Then something unexpected happened. A chant began in the front row, soft at first, then stronger, then thunderous. "Golden buzzer, golden buzzer, golden buzzer." The chant spread across the audience like electricity, catching the attention of the judges. Sophia turned, excited. Heidi covered her mouth. Howie grinned. But everyone was looking at Simon. Simon stared at Miguel for a long moment. You could see him fighting through a swirl of emotions, trying to remain the tough judge, the critic, the realist. But the power of the performance had already broken through his walls. Slowly, Simon stood again, leaning over the desk. "Miguel," he said softly, "I want the world to remember this moment exactly the way it felt. Pure, honest, real." He placed his hand on the golden buzzer. The audience screamed. An explosion of anticipation. Miguel froze, shaking his head in disbelief, tears falling uncontrollably. Simon smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and he pressed it. The golden buzzer detonated. Golden confetti burst into the air like a shower of stars, raining down on Miguel as he broke into sobs. The audience screamed so loudly it felt like the building was vibrating. The judges stood cheering, pointing at him with pride. Sophia jumped up and down. Heidi clapped through tears. Howie threw his hands in the air. Miguel fell to his knees, holding his grandfather's microphone to his chest as gold swirled around him like a blessing from above. This was more than an audition. It was a legacy fulfilled, a dream realized, a moment that America would never forget. And as Miguel looked up at the falling confetti through tear-filled eyes, you could tell he had just changed his life forever.